Welcome to another episode of the FMCG Guys. I'm Daniel Torres. Thanks for tuning in. Another week to the show. Hope you're enjoying this great time of the year, which by the time this episode airs will be towards the end of summer, which is a great time. I'm very excited about the episode today, where we'll be exploring the retail media strategy of the John Lewis Partnership, which you may know as a brand as a department store, but actually also own Waitrose, which out of the UK's main supermarkets, it's the most premium one. So for that, we'll be accompanied by Tom Langley, who heads up the Partnership's retail media efforts. But before that, let me say I'm very lucky to be accompanied by a great co-host, Christina Nicolau. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Daniel. I've just been back from the home of John Lewis. I was last week in rainy London and now back in the heat of the Mediterranean. Very happy to be here again.
Exactly. And well, since you just went to John Lewis then, what are you expecting to learn from Tom today?
To tell you the truth, having worked a lot with retail media from the brand side, I'm really keen to finally have this conversation and hear the retailer's perspective. And I guess that Tom has also worked in dunnhumby, so he also gets the point of view of the agency a little bit. So I'm very interesting to learn his takeaways of the whole thing.
Yeah, we're on the same page. I think that one thing that I'm also excited about is learning how in both on the department store side, but also on the supermarket side, how they're helping more premium brands position themselves to retail media. So audience, get yourself comfortable because you're all up for a treat today.
My name is Tom Langley and I am the head of retail media at the John Lewis Partnership here in the UK. And I guess not everyone necessarily knows what the John Lewis Partnership is. So we are a partnership, and what that, I guess, really means is we are a partner-owned organisation of 80,000 partners. So each kind of partner owns the organisation, so it's quite unique. And bringing, the idea was to bring together the best of socialism and capitalism to create an organisation where we can choose to do good with the profit, creating, great supply chains as well as investing into other areas. And we're made up of a grocery brand called Waitrose, so premium grocery brand, and then also a department store called the John Lewis. And then we also have a financial services arm with a credit card and some insurance offerings. And, as an organization, for context, we're, 12 billion of sales in the UK. 20 million or so customers will shop with us through the year, 366 stores. So very different in terms of stores and department stores versus grocery. But yeah, that's my role is really to head up our retail media offering here at the John Lewis Partnership.
And that's so interesting. Of course, I knew the brands, as names, they're quite well known, but I had no idea about the whole structure and how the whole thing works. So it's pretty unique, I would say. I was very interested to read about it. And how did you end up there, Tom? Tell us a little bit. What was your career path ending up doing retail media over at the John Lewis?
Yeah, it's a good question. How does anyone fall into retail media? And I guess it's quite a famous thing now, but I feel like I've probably worked in retail media in some guise for the last 17 or so years. So prior to the partnership, I was with dunnhumby for the kind of 15 years prior to that. And I know you had Nick on recently, who's the UK MD. I started my career very much as a hands-on analyst. So, in the early days of dunnhumby, when I joined, we were working with Tesco on what is their coupon book. And I would say that some of these kind of CRM coupon offerings were some of the early stages of retail media. We were sending 16 million customers in the UK a unique set of offers and trying to help supplier brands to use that offering to grow their brands, to drive sales. And then from around 2009, 2010, what we did with Tesco and dunnhumby is that they started to move their retail media offerings into dunnhumby. So we had the store media team, the magazine media team, the online media team to create a connected media offering, which, we talked about fondly when I was in dunnhumby as the sofa to store journey, connected sofa to store journey. I think there was an important point in time in grocery in the UK in 2009 when something called GSCOP was created, which is the Grocery Supply Code of Practice, which was aiming to essentially ensure that the practice between retailers and suppliers was good and not kind of all sorts of back margin deals which weren't clearly articulated. And retail media then kind of went on this journey that should be separated from core trading agreements so that you had a much more structured and a clear value exchange conversation. So, we built that for Tesco, and then I was lucky enough to then work internationally at dunnhumby and supporting retailers all over the world who were, I would say, from around, the late kind of 2018, 2019, saying to dunnhumby, this retail media thing, what should we do? What is it? And I think we therefore created a consulting offering, and I led the team, which was working with retailers all over the world to try and, I guess, work out what their retail media strategy should be. It's not the same for everyone. It depends on, you might be a very heavy own label, private label organization, which is very different to, heavy branded. You might be very store-based versus digital. So trying to work out what the right retail media offering was for kind of each of those. And then a year and a half ago, I was writing, my career path, what should I do? And one thing I kept writing down was I wanted to go, in agency, you would call it client side, but I guess just industry side. And I felt like I wanted to be in the decision-making seat for a while and really try and grow out, from the side of a retailer, the offering, and be the decision maker. So, that's my journey at the moment. I'm enjoying it. It's the difference between agency and retailer of, slightly slower paced, but also, I guess you're much closer to the details of some of the decisions that have to be made at retail. So yeah, it's been a fun career of 17 or so years in this kind of topic of retail media that's suddenly become, part of the limelight, I suppose.
Yeah, when did you start calling it retail media? I was wondering.
We called it dunnhumby Retail Media in I would say around 2011, 2012.
Oh, wow.
But we moved away from it many times. So we moved away from calling it retail media, and, whether it's activation or, we were talking about the word personalization, but very much cemented when in around 2018, we called it, dunnhumby Retail Media, just wanted to have a simple name, and then that's evolved into Insights and Media. And in the partnership, actually, what we've called it now is JLP Insights and Media. And we spent time thinking about, what should the name be? Because it isn't just activation and media. It's really, my accountability is all our insight solutions as well. And how do we create a set of marketing services for, our brand partners to, use all the data to understand customers? Who are their customers? How are they shopping? How's that changing over time? So that they can really think about it. And then, of course, then activate that through our channels. And also we have a big creative offering to collaborate with suppliers on the look and feel as well. So for me, it's really about establishing, a sort of agency inside the partnership that offers suppliers marketing services. And I think retail media in some ways is a very simplistic term in terms of actually you're really trying to create a fairly full suite of marketing services for brands to work with you as a retailer.
Yeah, which is another thing that I think that you probably see working with the retailers. You have much more direct contact with brands as well than you used to, probably, no?
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. And you have a broader conversation. I found it really interesting. I think if you're an agency, a retail media agency, you're focused on, you think it should be a separate conversation, like the marketing conversations versus commercial. But I think, particularly for smaller brands, actually, they don't have the resources or necessarily the different job families to have like lots of different conversations around trade, around marketing, around insights. And so actually it's useful to have that kind of JBP or annual trading conversation, which really tries to have a holistic conversation around, as a retailer and a brand, how do we grow together? And it needs to consider all the facets. Whereas I think some of the agencies would articulate that you need to separate retail media for, focus and expertise, which, I still partly believe, but I also believe it's important for a lot of brands to, keep that connected for their overall retailer relationship. And that's part of what I guess I've learned more over in the last 18 months or so is how to keep retail media connected to the broader relationship you have between the retailer and the brand.
Yeah. And let's start with Waitrose, since we've had people lately from from Tesco, from Boots, from Albert Heijn on the show. How, like, it's probably of the main UK supermarkets, the most premium one. What's the approach to retail media from that perspective of a more premium offering? Like, and especially for you having been at dunnhumby, I'm sure you can spot the differences having worked with a large array of companies like Tesco, for example.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the thing that I've loved most in the partnership is learning about the definitely the premium side of Waitrose, as well as then obviously the kind of non-food side of John Lewis. But for Waitrose, you know, the thing, you know, what we're famous for and our fame within the UK is the quality perception, and you know, our strap line is food to feel good about, and it's a really kind of premium retailer where, as a consumer or customer, as you walk around the store, you trust in the curated range that we've created, in the, you know, both from a quality and a value. So, you know, as a customer, you know, you're automatically kind of going in there to go and buy food that you believe has been quality, picked from a point of view of being higher quality and also ethical supply chains. That's something that we spend a lot of our time on, is ensuring we have ethical, good supply chains where farmers are looked after. But what does that mean for retail media? I think the key thing that I'm finding interesting is, and when you go back to some of your kind of academic reading and around brand framing, and if you think about when you're launching a brand and what your perception is of part of the range when you walk through a Waitrose, is that it is quality. It's a quality product. It's got, high value, high ethics. So I think, for me within Waitrose, if you're thinking about launching a new brand, the framing that the Waitrose brand and those two brands coming together does in terms of that quality perception, you think how much money in FMCG is spent on R&D and new product development. What you don't want to do is suddenly just take that to the mainstream retailers or the discounters and then just suddenly lower your price. That isn't what you were thinking about when you were doing your research and development. You were trying to create a brilliant product that solves a customer need and has a high value perception. And I think, just from that, that psychology part of how brand framing works. And, if you launch a new brand within the Waitrose brand framing, then, you're automatically, I guess, partly getting that endorsement and that support on your brand positioning. And it's about working together. We have to, obviously work with selecting the right brands that genuinely do have the right, brands for our consumers, the right kind of supply chain ethics and things like that we're proud of and we try and stick to. And, I think we've had a few brand exclusives recently, which is important for us as well, where, brands like Absolute Vodka and Heinz came together to create a kind of quite a cool pasta sauce. And, we were the highest seller of this in the UK and we had an exclusivity period. And then there's a brand in the UK called Deliciously Ella, and they've got their plants range. So you think about some of those brands where they're early on their journey and how they establish their position in the market. I think that's really where we play. We're not, we're just under 5% market share versus a Tesco that's close to 30. So we're never going to compete on that volume of sales. So we're much more going to help a brand to establish their brand position. And I think that's quite an interesting piece versus when you're at Tesco and other retailers talking about, mostly about reach and the data, that you can understand about a broad set of customers.
This is very interesting what you're saying. And if I hear you correctly, I'm also thinking this would sit across the funnel, right? You would say that deciding to, instead of going with mass media, to decide to go with retail media in a place where you would get those quality, let's say, credentials to your brand early on is going to be kind of a competitive edge for a brand that is trying to get their audience engaged in that way and kind of establish the awareness of their brand through a specific lens. Exactly.
And I think it depends by category, by brand and what your target audience is. But I think, as you want to target as consumers are trending towards wanting to be healthier, wanting to take care of themselves, wanting to buy ethically sourced food. I think that's where we kind of are better placed to support. And, we have a 5% market share across the board, but actually for certain categories will be 10, 20% market share. And it's typically in some of those kind of more premium subcategories that we'll support in. But I think it's definitely right that you have to, as an FMCG, I guess it depends on the brand you're launching and who you're trying to target. and when we're going to be better placed versus, you just want to kind of get out there to as big a reach as possible. But I think, you have to really think about your brand and who is it you're trying to appeal to, and how are you going to establish your initial perception, like with consumers.
Mm-hmm. And what are the trends you're trying to tap into? As you mentioned, for example, both wellness as well as things such as the ethical supply chain, which are emerging trends. We know that consumers care way more than they used to. And it looks like these things are kind of the topics that we will be discussing in the years to come as well, regardless of their size right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess our overall line of food to feel good about is trying to cover many things, right? You feel good because you're putting good food into your body, but you also feel good because of where it's come from. And there's been a lot of challenges in the last couple of years in supply chaining and availability. And part of what we're really proud of is, it doesn't necessarily reach the press, but when there's things like egg shortages and kind of commodity shortages, we're the retailer that still has quality, good availability because we pay our farmers in the right way. And I think they're the kind of things that we're proud of, because we are genuinely, trying to create that ethical supply chain. I think, it's a challenge because the other part of, I guess, the economy is that clearly a recession is kicking off and consumers are conscious of, costs and things like that. So, you've got both parts of it, that customers want to do the right things and they kind of want to put good food into their body, as well as, being cost conscious. And we've spent a lot of time on how do we also bring our costs down for the end consumer, working with the different brands as well as the supply chain to just have more efficiency and therefore bring costs down for customers.
Yes, and make sure you address the affordability issues that we see across countries right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And one thing that I think is very interesting of your job, Tom, and I was wondering, so Christina works at Coca-Cola and she has like 3 side hustles. And I was wondering yesterday how she manages her time. And a bit the same goes to you, actually, because you're managing the retail media of Waitrose, which is a huge job. And then you're managing the retail media of John Lewis, which is a big department store. So I imagine it's a whole new, different proposition. And I was curious to know, well, one, how you manage your time, but maybe that's for a whole other podcast. But secondly, how do you see department stores acting online and then in this retail media space? Because there's a lot of conversation about supermarkets, but department stores, which one could argue is maybe a better categories to do business online with, we don't hear much about retail media.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess a lot of the narrative on the industry was originally from Amazon, which is more kind of obviously not a department store. They're a pure play, and they're a marketplace. But I guess they established a lot of the fame around sponsored products. But it's definitely a different challenge, and department stores in general are tricky. In terms of a lot of the department stores in the UK have kind of gone bankrupt in the last few years, and there's kind of various tactics to how do you keep the high street. The difference between the department store is we're close to 70% of our sales now going through the online channel versus the store, whereas in Waitrose, we kind of went up to 20% during COVID, but have dropped back down to kind of lower teens. So it's much more of an online market. And I think our other challenge with a department store is you're typically trying to cover many categories. So you've got home, fashion, beauty, electricals, and then you're trying to compete with pure plays. So, what you want to do is you want to create solutions for customers across all of those departments. And that's quite a challenge when you've got a pure play beauty specialist kind of over here who's just ultimately absolutely focused on that. So part of the challenge, I actually think the biggest challenge is more the industry in non-food is less established than grocery when it comes to the ways of working between the retailer and the supplier. So there's not as much insight and data shared. So that lack of transparency, but also a much less structured approach to retail media. So I'm enjoying that challenge, which is, how do we create some structure around the offering and the value propositions, but also, the fashion brands and the higher end kind of premium beauty brands, which is where we specialize, don't necessarily have a history of buying into retail media offerings, buying into kind of insight offerings. So, some of these things we're doing it for the first time for some of these brands. So, our growth curve has to be a bit steadier because of that. Whereas, if you go to Unilever, there's a head of data, digital media and insights who is there and ready to have a conversation about your solutions. Whereas, that's not necessarily true. So that's kind of part of the challenge. But I think actually when you look at the potential, I would say it's higher, because in a department store, you've got more like 80% of your sales coming from branded goods. Whereas in grocery, it's typically, even for like a big grocery brand, it's still 50-50 for private label versus, because of fresh and how many categories there are in produce and things like that. So actually we think that the percentage potential is higher in the department store in terms of your turnover and what percentage you can make, from retail media revenue. But it's a bit of a journey and thinking about what to do and what order. And time management for me is about the partnership has had retail media in some guys, and I would say I've met a lot of retailers around the world, and most of them are in the same place where they've had a retail media department somewhere in their commercial team. They've sold some store stuff like cardboard around the store. They've got some banners on their website. They haven't really invested into data technology. And we're in the same place where we've got an established retail media offering, but it hasn't been invested into. And, so for me, it's a 5-year journey. And the part of my time is about what to do in what order, because you can't do everything in 1 year. So that's really, I guess, where I spend my time is grocery, department store, but also, do you focus on site? Do you focus on off-site, CRM, store, and trying to, think about how we mature in the right way?
Yeah, and for sure it's going to be a journey, and there's going to be certain levels of maturity coming as we all get more acquainted with this kind of model. But do you see the appetite there? Are those fashion and high-end luxury brands keen to try and activate more with retail media?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I feel optimistic, is that we've done lots of survey work and just had lots of conversations with the supplier brands, and they're absolutely, they can see it in the industry, and they see it when they're working with the likes of Amazon. And I guess the whole industry is raising expectations of, having these mechanics, like a sponsored product, sponsored search and banners. And it's become part of the industry. So even though they've not necessarily been doing it for years, they understand it. And what they want is they want that trust and transparency of understanding consumer behavior and then being able to activate it in a targeted way. I think everyone wants to move away from that kind of broadcast, splash the brand across everyone. And how do I target in a more intelligent way to be more efficient and effective with my marketing spend? So yeah, I'm optimistic because there is a high demand for change and kind of more intelligent uses of data and insight into media planning.
Are there any like specific categories? Because that's the thing, like in department stores, well, as Christina said, there's like fashion, luxury cosmetics, but then you have like home goods, cooking goods, appliances. Are there any categories that you're especially excited about?
Yeah, it's a good question, because home is a bit trickier, because a lot of the products are kind of, if you're buying a sofa, you don't necessarily think about the brand necessarily as much as you would. And like, whereas I think that the two categories, I'm always excited about electricals because, of course, like, we're a big provider, the biggest kind of department store for Apple in the UK. So clearly really exciting brands. But I think in fashion and premium beauty particularly, I find it really exciting because it's quite new for those brands. And how do they, in beauty, premium beauty particularly, the rate of new product development is incredible, like 2 or 3 new products every week. And you think about consumer expectation of, watching an influencer on TikTok talking about their latest kind of regime and things that can obviously make you feel and look better. So that rate of change, and so you consider about the number of SKUs in beauty, it's just, it's astronomical. And so if you think about, I'm shopping on my phone, how do I get on the screen? Like, that's a massive challenge for a new brand, right, who hasn't necessarily established themselves in search algorithms. So retail media becomes the modern merchandising, right? And you kind of have to use these mechanics to even get in front of the customer. And I think that's an exciting part, to try and do it in the right way so that brands see it as a great way to grow their brands and establish their brands, not just, some sort of tax of working with the retailer, but really an exciting way of it's a great marketing channel for them.
And if we go like a few points back in the conversation, you mentioned that in the way that you're managing all this business, you would always think what is the right way to do it, go online, go offline, what you do in store, what you do with retail media. So I'm wondering, for the different banners that you have within the John Lewis partnership, how do you establish those connections? What is it that you're trying to do to figure out how I activate in both ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't think that it's solved completely in terms of how you create a connected journey. So for us, it's within Waitrose, you kind of got, the stores, CRM through to the online journey. And then also some of our brands, so if you take something like Lego toys, we sell Lego both in Waitrose in more of a kind of gifting capacity through to then John Lewis. And so you can actually create a connected plan across all of our different channels, but also all our different banners. And I think you can get caught up in trying to be absolutely perfect in creating a data-led plan across all of those things. But I think that is not where the industry is. And so you have to use the art and science of brilliant media planning with as much of the data and tech that you can to say this is the best way to use these channels. And part of the early journey on that is attributing every single media proposition you have of what's it good at. Is it good at upper funnel, mid funnel, lower funnel? And so to help a brand as they go through their kind of life cycle of their brand, what are the right channels to use at the early stage of the journey to establish brand position and kind of consideration through to what are the right mechanics to really kind of keep customers in and keep customers loyal and buying. And that's the bit we have to consider. And I think that one of the problems in the industry is that we've been obsessed about what data and digital can do because, it's exciting and what the data and tech can do. But I think you always have to remember just because you can doesn't mean you should. You think about digital marketing and everyone obsessed about automation and data and tech, but actually everyone lost sight of, is this creating a really engaging piece of content or an experience for a customer? And I think that's where you saw a massive shift away from digital marketing was because actually people have realized they'd spent so much time automating it, but had forgotten about creating a brilliant customer experience and an engaging piece of content for the customer. And I think my focus is I want to not get too distracted by all the things you could do with data and tech, but just what are the right ways to create propositions to help brands genuinely grow and create an engaging experience with their consumers. Because that's what brands, what we're not talking about is sort of niche small brands. We're talking about some of the world's biggest brands, right? So, a lot of it, they spend so much time considering, how do they create that right brand positioning and solve for customers and creating beautiful imagery, really nice kind of artwork. And a lot of it's about how do you bring that to life for them.
But I love what you said, Tom, that just because you can, it doesn't mean that you should be doing something. And it feels like with the new emerging technologies, and we have so much possibility of what we can do that a brand and even a retailer can get lost into what should I be doing at the end of the day. I can do way more stuff than I used to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I find it interesting how much the conversation on retail media is about digital marketing and what you can do offsite. And that's partly because it comes from the US. But you guys are doing a great thing to create a podcast for the UK and Europe. And we're very different in how we buy and consume media, but we're also very different in terms of how we share data. So in the US, it's quite easy to create a data solution where you can monetize your audiences, you can make them available. That's not true in the UK. We don't share data across our different retailers. Consumers don't want us to do that. We're much stricter on our data policies. So that's one part of it is the kind of view of data usage from our, European consumers. But the other part is that, media planners are not currently trading on first-party audiences. You can buy a digital media campaign without a first-party audience from Waitrose or Tesco or Sainsbury's or Asda. And you can have good results. And I think we haven't yet got to a tipping point in the UK where people are really trading on those first-party audiences. Whereas actually, if you think about how much of the industry conversation is about what you can do in digital offsite, I think actually for a retailer, the most important place in the UK is your own channels, and really creating those brilliant journeys for customers. And you don't necessarily have to get as complicated with the data and tech when you're just you're trying to control things within your own ecosystem, versus when you start to go off your ecosystem, you obviously have to build data partnerships with, digital TV providers, Google, Meta, et cetera. It becomes quite complicated. And I would, if you're a retailer, really consider, what's the kind of the size of the prize in that space, and are brands really ready to trade on that? And as a brand, considering that in terms of, are you yet trading and looking for, audiences that you can get from retailers. And, I think at some point in the next few years, we'll see a big shift and people will start to trade in digital audiences from first-party data from providers such as Waitrose. But I think we're not there yet.
What will that mean exactly?
I think so. If you think about, you can go onto Google and Meta and buy an audience based on their data, so they've got pretty good data. And so, if you think about, you could go and buy a campaign, let's say you pay £8 per 1,000, so if you upload an audience, you can then obviously target that more specifically. So as a retailer, that your data, how do you charge a potential premium for the use of that data? But you have to be able to work and prove that it does make the media more efficient and effective. And I think that'll be a bit of a journey. It's different when it comes to, I think, things like digital TV and the display networks. I think digital TV will be the interesting one, is that when we see a shift in how people buy TV, so that they start to buy specific audiences versus buying, they want to be part of, content, for us, still as a brand, we're sponsoring particular types of programs, particular types of content. So it's not about like exactly targeting the audience at an individual customer. It's more targeting the audience who will consume that program. And I think we haven't yet seen that shift. And I think until we see that shift of people in the media buying and planning industry and the agencies buying in that way, we won't see a huge shift in spend to that direction.
Mm-hmm. And during the growth journey of retail media, what type of growing pains are retailers like yourselves having?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And this is my conundrum of what to do in what order, really. And So I think as a retailer, you can't build everything yourself. So you work with a lot of tech vendors. So for example, we work with JC&Co, where we have a digital screen network. We work with Citrus Ads for our sponsored product solution. We work with Salesforce in CRM. We also work with dunnhumby actually now in the kind of insight solution. So you imagine you're starting to build a kind of ecosystem of all these tech partners. And if you think about a sponsored product solution, so whether, Citrus Ads or Criteo or the other providers, they are absolutely focusing their time on creating a really efficient end-to-end solution for that single channel. Now, as a retail media or retail media network, you are trying to create a connected set of solutions. So you've got the tech players who are trying to be as efficient as they can in each of the individual channels, and you're trying to create a connected view of that, which is quite challenging because then there are not as many tech providers who are helping you to plan and book media across all those different channels. So I'd say that's kind of my biggest challenge. And I think we had a conversation with Simon Miles from Coca-Cola at Shop Talk when I was with you, Daniel. And we were talking about, Simon was saying that in the US, there's now 600 retail media networks. So you think about what kind of team you would have to have in an FMCG, to then go and buy against each of those retail media networks. And so is that the right way to go, to create an individual retail media network that someone comes and plans specifically against? Or actually, as a brand, is it more important to buy consistently, search, for example, across all of the retailers in the UK or the US or any market in Europe? And I think for me, that's a conundrum where it will be interesting to see where the market goes. I think if I was on the brand side, I would probably want to be able to buy as consistently as possible across all the different retailers to use my asset. It's all about how my brand shows up in the way that I've designed it to show up across all those retailers. So I think we have to see that consistency grow kind of in the industry versus, needing to go to each individual retailer to have a specific media plan within that retailer. I think we have to try and find that balance because, as a retailer, the thing that would stress me out is what we can't have is the Waitrose.com looking like it's just got all sorts of incongruent content and the content that isn't cohesive with our brand. So the content has to look and feel like Waitrose so that the journey looks cohesive. But equally, we have to bring the brands to life within that. So I think that's where we have to collaborate together to create formats and assets that can bring to life both of our brands in the right way and that allows FMCGs to buy fairly consistently across all the different retailers.
So it's a challenge of, on one hand, kind of aggregating all the multiple channels that we see out there, at the same time being relevant to the specific consumer and having the certain, let's say, freedom within the creative process of your assets, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
without overcomplicating somehow. I can't really see how this is happening soon, but yes.
Yeah, but I think on the how do we scale retail media, I don't think the scale will happen until there is more consistency and standardization, because for you think agencies who are starting to establish themselves in retail media, they're also trying to plan against all the other channels. So they're trying to plan, media across TV, traditional press, radio, connected TV, digital marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Retail media is one channel in that mix, and we are not yet established as a channel in every campaign. We're established as shopper marketing solutions, but if we want to grow, it's really going to have to be about how do we establish ourselves as a media channel in the full media mix. And I think therefore you have to make it easier to buy at scale. I think at the moment you kind of need bigger teams on both the FMCG and the retailer to really allow for that kind of scale that we think is possible in the industry.
So there's definitely a lot of stuff to be done to get where we would ideally like to be. But given the current landscape and how retail media right now operates, from your perspective, what would be your piece of advice to a brand? Like, what should they be doing right now to give the best possible experience to the consumer? Yeah,
it's a great question. I think it's, I still see too many conversations, which is between a retailer and a supplier, and obviously we're the same as any other, of the brands talking about their brand growth and the retailers talking about their retailer growth. And I think you have to come together and collaborate and talk about how do we collaborate for collective growth. And so I think there's a mindset piece there that to come to the table and talk about how do we create category growth, and that's creating new needs within the category, but it's also it might be that you're growing within a particular retailer, but I think coming together to work together for collective growth is a key piece. I think the other part is to find a way to separate conversations from trading to marketing. And don't what you can't have is a brand team working really hard on creating a beautiful brand, and then a trading team separately just dropping the price of that. And you can see it in certain brands, and like maybe Stella's a good example from kind of 10 years ago, where you had some of the best advertising you've ever seen, kind of like that they created in their TV ads, through to then the kind of brand position in stores where it was kind of always discounted. And I think that's where the brands have to work together to, how do they bring the best of all of their trading know-how on price, promotion, position, with also their objectives within marketing. And I think that, creating that cohesiveness in how they come together within their own departments of their kind of marketing teams and their trading teams, which still can be quite separate in the conversations we have.
Ensuring that the go-to-market is in line with the brand positioning you are trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's really hard, right? For whether you're a brand or a retailer, you need to focus on short-term trade as well as long-term value, brand value. And so I think we still have work to do, both in our brand teams at retailers as well as FMCG.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It will be a fascinating journey, I think, to see how this evolves. Tom, we have this question we ask. I think it's a great question. Hopefully it is, because we ask it every episode, so it better be. Knowing what you know now with all the learnings that you've had in your career, if you were to give like one piece of advice to yourself as you were graduating, what would it be? Career advice.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think I had some coaching a few years ago, and you spend time unpicking what's going on in your head, right? And the key thing for me was I think it's a common problem of having this kind of imposter syndrome, and like, oh God, everyone knows everything, and I don't know what I'm talking about. And I think that ends up, you end up being stressed at work, which is not healthy. But you also, you don't then have the freedom to kind of speak your mind. And I think I would tell myself to really just be confident that, everyone's winging it a little bit. Everyone's kind of blagging a little bit, so don't worry, just kind of be confident to work hard, work for an organization with purpose, and work with people you like. And, I think you can't go too far wrong, but I would, through my 20s and my early 30s, I felt like I was too stressed about, not necessarily feeling like belonging, whereas actually just, you start to realize that everyone's in the same boat, really. Everyone's kind of feeling that way. So just kind of go and be confident and do something with some purpose and drive some change in the industry.
This was Tom Langley from the John Lewis Partnership. Christina, what do you think? What are your takeaways from this conversation?
Honestly, Daniel, I would just start from the end. I loved this advice to his younger self, that remember that not everybody has it all figured out. I think that this really resonated with me, and it's one of the things that I also happen to talk about with my team as well as trying to remember this myself. And I think it's really important to remember that we are all trying our best, and not everybody's that much ahead in the journey than what we think.
Yeah, no, I think it was very interesting. We've received all kind of career advice in this show, and Tom's was very different. One thing I would say that working with a lot of people that are considered to be high potential in the companies, in other words, that they're changing roles every 2-3 years, these people are always on the learning curve, right? Because they're changing roles constantly. And the day that they're in the comfort zone is when they get promoted, normally because they want to get promoted as well. So I think that that's a good summary of imposter syndrome as well, no?
Absolutely. Though I do want to remind that imposter syndrome kind of like feels that it's something that's wrong with you because it's a syndrome. In many cases, it has to do about your environment and how people are interacting with you. So being confident in your own skin is super important. And remember that everybody's on the same boat as you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as well, actually, that imposter syndrome is not, because a lot of times it's framed as like a self-image thing, but it is true that if you're accompanied in the right way, you don't necessarily have to have that imposter syndrome. So yeah, that's a good point. What about on the retail media side? I really liked how we summarized really the value proposition of brands being able to position themselves in the market through a more premium proposition as Waitrose, for example.
Absolutely. I think that we need to remember that retail media is not just a different way in general of reaching different audiences, but also it gives to the brand a little bit of the elements that the retailer's brand has. And here in the example of Waitrose, what he was saying, how about there is a high level of trust in the curated range that exists within Waitrose, and people really get this perception of value, as well as the ethical supply chain that accompanies it. These are different brand characteristics as well. And when you decide to be advertising with Waitrose and you're chosen to do so and do it in the right way, this is also gives something to the positioning of your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that Waitrose has a very interesting approach as well. Not only is it the posh supermarket in the UK, if you like, but it is for a reason, right? Like they're higher costs for a reason, like that they only choose certain products, ethical supply chains as a differentiator, etc., which can really, if your brand has a certain characteristics, can really fit well with that value proposition and go hand in hand.
And I really liked how our conversation overall went. And there were a lot of different points that I found myself discussing with colleagues over the years, especially when discussing retail media, but not only, I would say generally with our relationships with the retailers. For example, you mentioned the importance of collaborating with a retailer in order to build collective growth and really to be talking about the category rather than, for example, just your brand, which is something, for example, that in P&G was the number one thing you learn. You always talk about category growth and creating value for your customers and your consumers.
Yeah, true. What about the difference between retail media in the US and Europe? I mean, I knew it was different, but it seems like it's very different.
I think that, he mentioned two parts. One is the difference in how we consume media, and the other one is the difference in how we collect and use data. And I would say, okay, the data part, most probably, it's something that we could also think about quite easily because of the GDPR and the regulations that exist in the EU. But at least for myself, I have never thought about what are the implications in the way we actually consume the media because of that. So I thought that this was really very interesting. And in many cases, when we're looking for advice on the internet, we don't really differentiate between continents and markets, do we?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a good point. What do you extract from that as a conclusion? What conclusion do you extract from that?
I would say that we really need to be very strategic with the decisions we are taking. And on the point of collaboration that we discussed before, really take this conversation to the next level together with your retailer. They have the first party data. They know their consumers really well. They know who shops there. And they also know how they are interacting with their platforms. So try to really spend some time to understand more, because you're one step closer to that shopper versus where you are with Facebook advertising, for example, or mass advertising on TV, right? So have these conversations, be curious about it, and really be very intentional about the choices you are making to provide the best possible experience based on what the consumer wants.
That was a good summary, Christine. So thanks for delivering it. And thanks also to our audience for tuning in once more. Feel free to get in touch on our website. We actually have a contact page. So if you have any feedback, be it good or bad, any suggestions you have for the podcast, you would like to come on, you have a friend that you would recommend comes on, do write to us. Don't hesitate. We're also contactable on LinkedIn, obviously. Have a great day, and we'll see you next Wednesday with another episode.